It's Sunday, February 7th, 2016, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Rishi Kumar, Senior Product Manager at TELE-WHAT Enthusiast Network. He's going to lead a talk today on working remotely. So let me just briefly explain the format to those of you who may be joining us for the first time today. Along the bottom of your screen are mentors and mentees in the Product Mentor program, and these are people who get paired up one-on-one all around the world, mentor and mentee in the field of product management, helping make product managers better and up their skills and get all kinds of great upgrades. As this goes on, you'll be able to post your questions, and I'll feed them over to the mentor in fairly real time. Just go to theproductmentor.com/live, and I will feed those questions on over. I will just do some quick introductions with those who are joining us at the beginning of the talk right now. So I'll just start with whoever's closest to me, and that is Rishi. Just a quick intro. Are you a mentor or mentee? A little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi, my name is Rishi Kumar. As you mentioned, Jeremy, I'm a senior product manager. A little bit more about that during my presentation, but I'm a mentor. My mentee, Jins, is unavailable for this one, but I've had a great experience so far, and looking forward to the next few months to come. So yeah.
Excellent, and let's go to Lonnie to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Lonnie Rosenbaum. I'm a mentee in this program. My mentor is Mark Abraham, based out of the UK, and I am a product manager at a company called Booker in New York City.
Excellent. I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating here today. As I said, the question, as the mentor, Rishi gives his talk on working remotely. As the questions come in, I'll be interrupting him from time to time to pass on your questions in fairly real time. So to post those questions wherever you are, and it's open to just really everyone out there, go to theproductmentor.com/live. You can watch the video and post your questions there as they come in. I'll find good moments to interrupt them and get your answers. So with that all said, let me hand it over to you, Rishi, to take it away.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. So today, my talk is on the topic of working remotely. I'm going to explore, structures, the environment, the tools, and the cultures you need to effectively work remotely and also manage a remote team. So just a little bit more about myself to begin with. I'm a senior product manager at TELE-WHAT Enthusiast Network. I work for the Sports and Entertainment Division, where I oversee product for a variety of brands such as Surfer Magazine, Grind TV, Slam Magazine, Bike Magazine, Powder, Snowboarder, and a few other great brands that we have. I have over 10 years of experience in the digital media industry and online video space. And for the past 3 years, I've been working remotely from our New York office. My team is distributed over 4 offices, and in the past, I've managed a remote team in India. So, there are a lot of different terms that our people use to describe remote work, right? So, for example, things like telework, telecommuting, working from home. I've heard terms such as digital nomad before, right? So, the OPM, which is the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, they prefer the word telework, and they describe it as a work arrangement that allows employees to perform work during any part of regular paid hours at an approved alternative website or work site, right? So this actually makes sense when you consider the word tele comes from the Greek word meaning from a distance, and then when you combine it with work, it means work from a distance, right? So no matter what term you use to describe remote work, for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to consider it as really any work done from an outside location, any location outside of the traditional workspace, right? So this can include things like a home office, a coffee shop, a co-working space, or any other environment where you can get your work done. People who work remotely aren't really limited to a certain sector of the population, right? Men, women, parents, people with children, young and old, they can all work remotely. However, you can't work remotely if you don't have organizational support, right? So in 2013, Yahoo famously sent out an internal memo that for the most part banned the practice of working remotely, right? The memo said To become the absolute best place to work, communication and collaboration are important, right? You need to be working side by side. It's critical that we're all present in our office. Some of the best discussions and decisions and insights, come from meeting new people, hallway discussions, impromptu meetings. So speed and quality are often sacrificed when working from home, and therefore, we need to be one Yahoo, and that starts by being together, right? So, I'm not sure if Yahoo's stance on remote work has changed over the past few years, but the point is this, right? While lots of different types of people can work remotely, if your company doesn't have, it doesn't prioritize or value remote working, then it's going to be an uphill climb. The only way you're going to be successful in working remotely is if you have support from the top and a formal structure in place. Okay, so let me just briefly go over a few of these different types of team structures that exist, right? So Martin Fowler wrote a great article where he describes the many shades of remoteness, and here's some great illustrations from his article. So working remotely looks different for every company, right? But if you had to narrow down the different types of structures into four, here would be some good examples, right? So you have your single team or co-located team, right? Which is where pretty much everyone is located in the same physical location. This is like the traditional office setup where you might be sitting right next to your team members. You have a multi-site team, basically like two or more co-located groups at separate locations. For example, having like a product team in Los Angeles, maybe a development team in India. A team with satellite workers. This is where most of your members are co-located, but a few individuals are working remotely, either from home or from another office. And then finally, a distributed team, right, where most of the people are working in separate locations, right? And this can be quite spread out geographically. And because of this, most teams are required to adopt a remote-first mentality, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more in my presentation. Okay, so I wanted to give you a quick little personal story about how I was able to work remotely. So let's go back to 2012, where I was working in San Clemente, California. Pretty much everyone on my team, worked out of that same office, right? Including from management to product to engineering to editorial to sales and advertising. The only person who wasn't out of that same office was our creative director, and he was in El Segundo, California, which is about an hour car ride away. At the same time, my fiance and I were in a long-distance relationship. I was in Southern California. She lived in Seattle, Washington, right? We weren't sure if she was going to move down to California or if I was going to move up to Washington, D.C. So, I was able to, luckily we had a satellite office only a few miles from Seattle, and I was able to convince my boss to let me work remotely on a 2-week trial period, right? If all went well, I would work remotely on an ongoing basis by making frequent trips back to California for some face-to-face time with my team. Everything really did go well, and I believe one of the big reasons for doing that was because of how efficiently I had worked with how efficiently I was able to work with my creative director. We had gotten really good at communicating and collaborating using screen sharing, right? Using file sharing, just talking on the phone and getting our work done. So it didn't really matter if you were just an hour away or 1,200 miles away. The quality of our work didn't change. And I believe what also really helped was I had already made those personal connections with everyone on my team, right? I knew who to approach to get work done, if I needed something. I had already built that kind of social capital with my team, and I knew that they could trust me to get my work done, right? So it didn't matter if I was in the office, working from home, working from Seattle or New York, right? So much like my personal long-distance relationship, working remotely with a team is no different, right? It's another long-distance relationship. It requires effort, and you need to make a conscious effort if you want to be successful at working remotely. So just to recap, I pitched working remotely, and I set up a 2-week trial period, right? I established a plan to make frequent visits back for face-to-face time. I made sure I had the tools needed to get my work done, and I proved that I could be trusted to do remote work. Okay, so let me talk about a few benefits of having remote employees and working remotely. Increased productivity, right? And we see this because due to fewer distractions and fewer interruptions, which allows people to focus. happier employees. Often offering flexible work schedules leads to happier and more loyal employees, right? Which can in turn lead to higher employee satisfaction, reduced turnover and fewer sick days. It can also allow for more family time, which is important for employees that are trying to raise a family. If you're working from a home office, you spend less time commuting, right? Which is not only beneficial for the environment, but it saves you time and money. And um, if you have a remote team and a distributed team, you're not restricted by location, right? So when you're trying to find new candidates, you have a much wider talent pool, right? You can focus on finding the best talent rather than what's local. According to global workplace analytics, a single snow day can cost the Northeast region employers over 1.3 billion in lost productivity. Right? In 2014, federal employees in D.C. who worked from home during 4 official snow days saved the government an estimated $32 million in productivity losses. Right? So here's another great reason to allow your employees to work remotely, because winter storms happen, right? And it's a wake-up call for companies that don't have a flexible workplace schedule strategy. So if people are already familiar with working remotely, then when a severe weather or disaster might occur, they can keep on working. It's also really good, to have a plan and a structure in place in case employees are sick and they might have to work from home, a few days a week. Okay, so while there's some great benefits to working remotely, working remotely isn't as glamorous as you think. Okay. Yeah, the thought of maybe staying at home and working in your pajamas or working on your sofa might sound great, but in reality, not everyone is cut out to work remotely. Some people just perform better in a co-located environment, right? They need that in-person interaction to feel connected. It's important to note that a great employee doesn't always make a great remote employee, right? So what makes a great remote employee? So communication is one of the greatest challenges facing all employees, but especially remote employees. And communication issues can only get magnified when dealing with teams, across different time zones. It's really important to hire strong communicators, right? People who know how to communicate effectively. Excellent communicators know how to get their point across with fewer words, right? It helps if you have self-starters, right? If you have people on your team who are highly motivated. These are the people who are going to be your most productive employees. You want resourceful individuals that can find answers from themselves, right, and not depend on others, to find out, answers. So it really helps also to hire people with previous remote experience, or perhaps whether it's freelance experience or entrepreneurial experiences. Also, prior experience dealing with vendors and external clients really helps. So these are some things that make a great remote employee. So I found this graph from an article written by Bob McWhirter, and he has a hypothesis that says adding more remote workers to a non-distributed team only increases problems and frustrations, right? However, you'll eventually come to a tipping point, right, where you hire enough remote workers, and it forces the team to kind of redistribute and rework their habits, rework their expectations, rework their workflows, and the team will ultimately, function better because of it, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's explore this a little bit more, right? So when there are only a few remote workers and the majority of the team is in one location, it's really hard to realize that the people working remotely are being left out and essentially being treated as second-class citizens, right? So you basically come to a point where the old setup no longer works. In web design, we use a strategy called mobile first, right? I believe teams should adopt a remote first mentality so that everyone feels equal and included. It's not fun if your team is collaborating, everyone's in a conference room, and you're just listening on a crappy speakerphone, right? When there's inequality between remote and office work, both sides start to resent and distrust each other. the people working, remotely feel left out and cut out of the action. The people in the office just feel that remote workers are slacking off, right? So to truly have equality between remote and non-remote employees, there needs to be no advantages for people who come into the office, and there should be no disadvantage from being away from the office or at home to get your work done. I was speaking to Justin Gallagher, who's the VP of Product at TRELLO, and I learned that they actually practice this remote-first mentality. And here's an example: like you have 3 people that need to meet, right? Two of those people sit next to each other in the same office, but that third person is remote, right? So in these situations, what they do at TRELLO is they all default to a video conference so that no one feels left out. Communication equality is critical to making sure that people don't feel left out. The key takeaway here is even if you only have a small percentage of remote employees, make a conscious effort to make sure that everyone feels as if they're part of the team. So, according to a Harvard Business Review article, trust is the most critical element needed for successful collaboration between teams, right? Managing remote teams is different than managing an in-house team, right? A small problem for an in-house team can snowball into a much larger issue for remote teams, right? And this is due to misunderstandings and communication issues. It's really hard to communicate with teams without having a certain level of trust, right? Having trust in your team means that you can trust them to deliver results on time. You can rely on them, right? If someone needs to work from home for a day or for a week, I know I can trust them to get their work done without having to micromanage, right? If someone on my team needs help, I know I can trust them to reach out and ask for it. Having trust in my team means I'm not second-guessing everything that they're doing, right? So trust is critical to any team, but I feel like trust is even more important when managing remote teams. It helps with the collaboration process, right? I mean, it removes those communication barriers and really creates a safe and supportive environment where all ideas are welcome. So what are some ways that you can build trust, right? To begin with, I believe you build trust with personal connections, right? So distance can put strain on any relationship. Therefore, it's really critical to have this kind of trusting relationship. And by building personal connections, you can not only boost morale, but you'll find that it's much easier to work together. So to begin with, create as much face time as possible, right? Even a small amount of face time can go a really long way towards building trust and a great relationship. If you have a main office, and you've recently hired a few new remote members, plan to have them spend a few days or even the first week in that main office, right? As good as collaboration tools have become, none of them are as quick and effective as being in the same room as each other with each other. When you're kicking off a major project with remote stakeholders or with a remote team, try to meet in person first, right? Have an initial face-to-face meeting. It'll not only help you build trust, but it'll help the project go a lot smoother because you've established that relationship with each other, right? If you're in the same location with someone, go out to lunch, go grab a cup of coffee together. The more comfortable and at ease you are with your remote team, the more likely it is that you'll want to work with them. I think sharing a meal or coffee is a great way to bond and make people feel connected, right? So this applies to everyone, right? But it's really important for remote teams. Introduce yourself. Take the time to build connections, right? Make an effort to get to know people. The more opportunities there are for people to connect, to create that face time, I think the better it will be, right? And even if you have to use a video chat, like the Trello example that I had given you, right, to build personal connections, do so, because you can build trust, and by seeing people face to face, it's so much more powerful than just a phone call or an email, right? Another way that you can do this is by maybe sending an intro email where you're introducing yourself and your team members, right? Include a photo, maybe like your bio, some information about their roles, a few fun facts, hobbies, interests, etc. At the very least, what this does is it helps share valuable information about who the people on your team are, right? when you need something, you know who to approach, but you can also put a face to a name. And I think if you're managing a remote team, maybe having a company mentorship program is a good way to go. It's a great way to not only share knowledge between your team, but to connect people and from various different departments, potentially. So, regardless of how your team communicates, teams should encourage the building of these personal connections. It'll help your team. It'll help you see your teammates as people, right? As opposed to just like random names on an email chain. So let's go over some real life examples of how companies are actually building these personal connections. Atlassian, the company behind Jira, Confluence, HipChat, they empower their employees to write their own introductory blog post. So this blog post can include things like hobbies, interests, etc., and they sent it out to their internal Confluence system. It's a really fun and interesting way to introduce new employees to the rest of the company. Existing employees can read these blog posts. They can comment on them. They can connect with them, and it's just a really great way for people with similar interests to connect, and especially for those new remote employees. Yuri Victor from Vox Media wrote in a blog post that their editorial products team has a meeting every Friday where they talk about what's happened during that week. But in the first half of that meeting, it's an adult show and tell, where basically anyone can talk about whatever they want, right? They can share their experiences. They can share stories about their kids or vacations or what class they're taking, right? A lot of companies bond after work, maybe over beers or for whatever. But at Vox, what I noticed that they actually make time to bond during work, right? Because they believe that building these personal connections is part of their job. So I really like that example. At the company GitLab, they have an online hangout once a month, where their team gets together, drinks a beverage of their choice, and just hangs out. It's basically like a virtual office happy hour. GitHub requires their employees, their new employees, to spend their first week in San Francisco, right? So they can develop a better understanding of their company culture. And finally, at my company, I like to fly back to Southern California at least once a quarter to meet with my team. I make it a point to schedule these meetings when we have our company-wide all-hands meetings or town hall meetings at the same time. So it's a great way. These company-wide all-hands meetings is a great way to not only see everyone, but I think having them is a great way to kind of reinforce the company message and build company culture. So I like to fly back during those times. In addition, on our digital team, we try to organize fun events and activities whenever we can. It can be a sponsored activity where we take the team out to bowling or indoor go-karting, or it can be informal, right, where you have a happy hour or you just hang out with your teams after work or during lunch or during coffee, right? Just a great way to boost morale and to build trust within the team.
So yeah, before you continue, Rishi, I just wanted to jump in, remind people that they can submit their questions to the productmentor.com/live as we continue through this. As you have questions, just send them on in, and I will pass them along to Rishi. Back to you, Rishi.
Great. So we just finished talking about personal connections. Another way to build trust is with visibility, right? So if you know what someone is working on, I can see you can see the progress that they're making, and you know that they're taking care of business, and you can trust them, right? So make your work visible. Provide regular updates. I think that's a really major requirement for building trust. On my team we use Jira. We use it to plan and prioritize our tasks. We also use it to track how long these tasks are taking, right? And how many hours people are spending on projects. We have a daily stand-up meeting, plus weekly planning meetings, and these really help to know what people are working on and keep the team on the same page. I think using something like Jira is also really important to prioritize and stay up to date on progress. So make your work visible. I think that's really vital. Um, besides making your work visible, I think having visibility into upcoming projects is critical. I've had my fair share of experience where the product and engineering teams are usually like the last people to know about a certain project, maybe because a sales team just sold something, and someone was dragging on approvals, and it's due next week. So it doesn't create a very friendly or trusting work environment. Having maybe a shared tool or system where you can see upcoming projects, even potential projects, right? I think it's really important to create visibility and give your teams enough time and enough heads up and lead time to plan, right? And finally, I believe, in to have visibility, I think you should have an open door policy. While I'm not a fan of more meetings, I think certain meetings are helpful, right? Every Monday morning, my group has a department head meeting where all the different, department heads are represented. This is a senior leadership team, right? And they're valuable because they give you insight they'll give me insight as to, what's going on in other departments that are not directly related to product, right? And it helps give me insight as to, how and why decisions are made, right? It's also a great forum to ask, how it's also a great forum to ask questions and making sure that our senior team's on the same page, right? So our CEO does a really great job of this as well, and creating this kind of open door culture. He always says that his door is always open, right? And all comments and questions and ideas are welcome. Complaints and problems are welcome as well, but only with proposed solutions, if they're included. He's also literally implemented an open door policy where there are no doors in any of our offices, right, except conference rooms. So just building that kind of trust with visibility, I think, is really critical. So what are some other ways to build trust besides personal connections and visibility? I think these include setting clear goals and expectations, right? Clear goals and expectations are fundamental. They build trust, and you can use them to maintain trust because everyone's on the same page, right? If a conflict or disagreement occurs, you have those goals to reference, right? And they can help them. Those can help realign you, right? I think when you have a launch meeting, have an explicit discussion about what these goals and expectations are, right? What are your key metrics? What's your definition for success, right? Having those KPIs and developing those, OKRs. I think those are really critical to do, and I think they go a long way to building trust. Provide ongoing feedback, right? Every team needs regular input as to how they're doing, right? So make a special effort to give that, especially for remote teams. And this means both good and bad feedback, right? Could be a quick email saying, hey, we had a great week, or great job solving that issue. These kind of emails go really a long way to building a good and trusting relationship. And when things don't work out, make sure that feedback gets delivered as well. Foster cultural understanding. So what I mean by that is, you'll inevitably work with teams that are from different cultures, right? It could be a language barrier, it could be a cultural barrier. Just be aware of that, right? And this could even happen when working with domestic teams, right? I remember I was on a conference call with an individual from Tennessee once, and I was having like the hardest time understanding their heavy Southern accent, right? In situations like these, it's just important to be respectful. Don't be afraid to ask other people to either slow down, speak up, or repeat themselves. Maybe use like a written communication or with email or instant messaging. I think you just have to be conscious and aware of these kind of cultural differences. So in order to effectively work remotely, I really believe you need certain types of structures in place, and they're really important to make sure that everyone is aware of these structures and standards and expectations, right? So, for example, methods of communication, right? Make sure everyone knows, these are the tools and resources that we're going to use to collaborate, right? Like what kind of languages are we going to speak, right? Will English be the main language of communication? Is there a system or calendar in place where you can notify other team members, if you're going to be out of the office or if you're not available, right? If an emergency happens, what's the method of communication that will be used, right? So make sure you identify the different methods of communication. Expected working hours, right? Define what your normal business hours are, right? If you have remote people scattered in different time zones, how will that work, right? So for example, I'm in New York, but my team's in the West Coast. But I like to work West Coast hours because I like to be available when they are, right? When I was managing when I was in California and I was managing my team in India, they're 13 and a half hours ahead of us, right? So how do you schedule the meetings to effectively communicate with them, right? So what are the expectations for being online after hours? Is there an expectation that you'll need to respond to emails over the weekend, right? If you have a main office, are you expected to visit every few months, right? So coming up with these expecting work hours, I think, is really important as well. Team meetings and events, right? So, we have a morning stand-up every day at 10 a.m. and everyone is expected to not only participate but attend, right? You should establish like a daily or weekly meeting that works for your team for whatever time. It could be a weekly Google Hangout. The important thing is making sure that it's a formal meeting and everyone is required to attend, right? And it just allows everyone to be on the same page. It gives people the opportunity to catch up and ask questions. If you don't want to do this, meeting, you can do things. I've heard people do, I'm sorry, they submit weekly progress reports, right? So this can be written instead of actually having a meeting. It's just a really quick way to see what people have accomplished and if they have encountered any roadblocks. It's also probably, it can be also useful for managers, right, who might not be part of that daily morning stand-up meeting. I also think it's important to have regularly scheduled team building activities, right? These can include things like hackathons or other activities that really bring people together and make them feel connected. So having a structured feedback process is really important, right? Whether this is performance reviews or whether it's just just regular feedback, having a structure to do this, whether it's quarterly or twice a year, it's really important. Setting up regular one-on-one check-in meetings, phone calls with your supervisors, right, or other people that you manage. Feedback it's really important to get this ongoing feedback to not only see how people are doing, but connecting with people on a personal level. Post-mortems, right? I think these are really valuable for teams, especially remote teams, to have these kind of meetings after every launch, right? Whether it's successful or not. Make sure you walk away with key learnings and apply those key learnings to future projects. Having a formal onboarding process, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit in the next few slides, give you an example of it. But having a formal onboarding and training process, I believe, is really critical. It helps your new employees, get off to the right start. They can be up and running on the first day. So I think that's really important to have a standardized formal onboarding process, right? And finally, acknowledgement. I think it's really important to have some kind of a system in place where you're regularly celebrating like milestones or accomplishments, maybe even birthdays or just successful launches, right? Our HR team gives out service awards for people who have been around for 5-10 years. We have a company newsletter where we announce product launches, key wins, maybe a great deal that we just signed, right? Showcase your work. It builds that trust, but it also, it sets that standard for acknowledgement. So I think that's really critical.
So we have a question that just came in. And the question from this anonymous individual, definitely feel free to use your names when you want, is they're asking, what is the best way to participate in a department meeting that has 30 to 40 participants where they're the only one joining remotely, and it's they're joining, I think, from Italy to the 30 to 40 participants in London.
So what's the best way to participate? Is the
You're
question?
the only one remote, and there's like 30 to 40 other people in the room.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a tough situation when you're the only one remote. I think having that established, trust, or people who know who you are, what value you bring to the team. I think that's important to have that kind of already established. I'm going to be talking about this in a little bit as well, but be prepared, right? Have some great questions, whether it's written down, ready to go. Be prepared. The more you do this, the more trust you have. I feel like they will know that you're an important member of the team, right? You're not going to be invited to a senior leadership meeting if you're not an important member of the team. I think you have to have that kind of understanding that everyone here is really important, and everyone's questions and insight are valuable, right? So it could be something like talking to the moderator beforehand and saying, hey, what's the best way to ask questions, right? Am I able to just interrupt and ask questions, or what's the best way for me to go ahead and do that, right? And if you're the only one working remotely, I think it really is important for you to seek out maybe the group leader or the moderator and say, I'm trying to do this. Maybe they can help you with some tips and for doing that. So.
It's really good advice. So yes, that's all the questions we have right now. So keep them coming in at theproductmentor.com/live. With that said, back to you, Rishi.
Great. Thanks. So we just finished with this. I'll give you a real-world example of a company that I think does a really good job of setting up standards and expectations, right? So this is the product team over at Vox Media, right? So they've created a code of conduct that they use to govern their environment, right? This code covers topics such as values, expected behaviors, right? Unacceptable behaviors, how to report a problem, taking care of each other, making a commitment to constantly improve, and finally how to contribute to this code of conduct. They state in their code that we've created it not because we anticipate bad behavior, but because we believe that articulating our values and obligations to one another reinforces the already exceptional level of respect among our team. And because having a code provides us with a clear avenue to correct our culture should it ever stray from that course, right? So, and they go on to describe that this code, applies in various different areas, whether it's professional lives, including, their offices, to off-site company events, to Slack and email exchanges, to social media, to industry conferences, and et cetera, right? So I think this is a really great example, right? Having a code of conduct that formally outlines like the social norms, the rules, the responsibilities. It's just a really excellent way to create that structure for a team, especially for a remote team. So kudos to them for doing that.
So next question comes from Jimmy. And Jimmy's asking if you have any experience of gathering requirements remotely, and if you have any techniques to recommend.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I do that all the time, right? So what I like to do is getting on a video chat with the key stakeholders, getting everyone on the same page. Do a lot of screen sharing with my teams. Trying to see whether it's competitive analysis or what other companies are doing that we want to see, or check out interactions, right? I think when you're a product manager, to really understand what the requirements are. For me personally, I like to see them visually, and being able to have that kind of screen sharing really helps for us, right? So I can see, okay, when they talk about how this functionality works, they might not be using the right ways to describe it. But if I'm actually seeing it, I can understand, okay, this is what they want, right? So I think that really helps with the requirement gathering process. So use that technology, use the screen sharing. Ideally, you can be, if you're in the same room with them, once in a while, great. But I would use technology like that.
Excellent. Keep the questions coming in at theproductmentor.com/live. And back to you, Rishi.
Great. So I wanted to give you another example of an onboarding process that I mentioned, right? So Trello. If you're not familiar with Trello, it's a collaboration tool which organizes your projects into boards, and there are many ways to use a Trello board, but I really like how they use their own product for a pretty awesome onboarding process. right? So Elizabeth Hall, who's their VP of People at Trello, writes that onboarding may be one of the most important steps, simply because it sets the new hire on the right trajectory, or, from day one, and gives them a great first impression of the company, right? No one wants to spend the first day of an exciting new job just sitting at an empty desk or twiddling their thumbs, right? Maybe because someone forgot to order a computer, or forgot to compile their paperwork, right? Um, they looked at problems facing new remote employees during their onboarding process, and they said that new remote employees weren't getting to know the rest of the company as fast as new employees who worked in the office, right? They didn't know who to talk about their 401ks, right, or what equipment they should purchase, or about our conference policy, right? They didn't know who else was a recent hire, or maybe someone who's been there for 8 years, right? So onboarding is more than just logistics, right? It's personal. Yes, it's important to get the health insurance forms filled out and getting your equipment. But companies should also use this opportunity to convey their culture, history, maybe a fun company story. Remember, the goal here is to really make your new remote employees feel like they're a valuable part of the team, right? Make sure that they're really on board, right, with the information. So, I believe using a Trello board really can help streamline that onboarding process, right? It acts like a centralized to-do list, a checklist, a wiki, all rolled into one. You can set it up so you have standard information, for all the employees, and you can also customize it depending upon what department you're in. So just looking at Trello's, their own example, they have things on their board like things to do before the first day, right? Things to do on your first day and during your first week, right? They have a done list where you can move issues that have been, or tasks that have been completed. There's like a can I have list, right? Read me first. They talk about equipment. They have things like, can I have plants on my desk? What kind of books, can I have? Who can I talk about list? I'm sorry, who do I talk to about list, right? Which are basically like frequently asked questions. There's a history behind list, and which is a great way to share company history and company culture. And then there's a who's who list, which really helps introduce yourself to the company. So I think that's a really great example of using Trello board for an onboarding process.
So this question just came in from Liel. It's as a product man, it's a bit generic, but it was still applicable, so I wanted to jump in with it now. As a product manager working remotely with developers on a feature, what were your 3 biggest challenges and how did you handle them?
Okay, sure. Let me think about that for a second. I think going back to the other question as well, just clearly communicating what requirements are needed has always been one of the challenges, right? So, and it's been an ongoing process where, especially when I'm designing a website or a mobile experience, getting those interactions across and communicating those effectively is one of the hardest things to do, because you want it to work a certain way and you can document it all you want, but end of the day, people have to read that document, and maybe coming up with another way to express those requirements and finding a better way to do it is ultimately going to help. So for example, for our teams, we recently started prototyping everything. I mean, we've been doing it for a little bit, but in the initial years, we was just a requirement or maybe just a flat mock-up, right? But having interactive prototypes, I think really has helped cut down a lot of that back and forth on requirements, especially when you're working with a remote engineering team, so they can see, okay, this is what we're actually going to be building, right? So I think those are some of the challenges. It's a good example of a challenge I faced with the remote team, especially remote engineering team, and how I was able to use prototypes to kind of overcome those.
Excellent. And everyone else, keep your questions coming in at theproductmentor.com/live. Let's go back to the talk.
Great. So I just wanted to talk about some quick tools and resources that really can better help you communicate and collaborate with remote teams. So it's important to note that no matter what tool you choose, just make sure everyone's on board, right? And make sure everyone's aware of how to use them. Quick note about email. As much as I dislike using email, it's still the most commonly used form of communication in the workplace. Email is still useful for sending things out like status updates and communicating decisions. However, it's important to make sure everyone on your team is using email efficiently. This means keeping emails clear and concise, promptly responding to emails, and managing your inbox effectively. And I think most importantly, knowing when not to use email. So just a few things here. So chat and group communication tools, right? These include things like Slack, HipChat, Campfire, FlowDoc, Yammer, etc. Right? So most organizations use one of these tools as their primary method of communication. It's great to keep all the team communication in one place, and it's also really valuable because you're able to archive these conversations and go back to see what someone wrote. Right? That way, if you're maybe away from your desk, you can quickly skim a thread that and see what you missed. It's also a great way not to interrupt someone, or if you're like tapping someone on the shoulder if you're in the same office, right? I mean, people can respond to whenever they have a minute to your message. So I think tools like these that allow for not only one-to-one conversations but group conversation and private conversations are really valuable. Some of these tools have rooms and channels that can be set up for projects. Like we have a separate engineering channel, separate product channel. We have channels for different projects, right? So one for Surfer Magazine, one for Grind TV. And a lot of these group communication tools support third-party applications that you can add on and really help customize your experience. Video conferencing, things like Google Hangouts or Skype or Peer-In or Squiggle, which is like an always-on video chat. I think these are really valuable to use. There's no substitute for face-to-face conversations, so video calls are like the next best alternative. Use them liberally. When you're working when you're working remotely for meetings or quick conversations or communicating requirements, right? They're really valuable to use. And on that point, I think screen sharing is also a very valuable tool, right? I like to use Join Me a lot. You can use GoToMeetings or even like a Hangout or Skype by sharing your screen. These are really essential tools for collaboration, for trainings, for making sure that you're getting your point across, right? And Join Me is like the tool that I use primarily to communicate with our creative director back in California. Boards and trackers, right? Things like Trello, things like Jira, Basecamp, Asana, right? These are really primary tools for project management, for issue tracking, for road mapping, right? Really essential for keeping everyone in the same loop. Keeping on top of everything so you know who's working on what. The point I want to make here is no matter what you use, make sure everyone knows how to use it. Again, make sure you have some clear guidelines. This is the process we use to submit a bug. This is a process we use to create a ticket. This is the workflow, how tickets should go from a wish list item to ready for development to it's in progress to it's been worked on, so tested out on staging to be deployed, right? So whatever you do, come up with a process that you agree to with your team. And I think that's really going to help. Document and file sharing, right? Things like Google Doc, Confluence, Dropbox, Box.net. It's really important to have a centralized repository for documents so that everyone on your team knows where to go to find them, right? So that they're self-sufficient and self-reliant. I think Google Docs is also a great example of being able to collaborate on real time, right? People can edit, can comment on Doc. And we use these all the time for whether it's a Google Sheets or Google Docs to help keep our teams organized and up to date on upcoming projects. And some other tools and resources I would wanted to mention. There's a tool called HomeSlice, which is great to kind of finding ideal meeting times across multiple time zones. BrowserStack is a great QA tool that I use to test on multiple browsers and multiple device types. Using some kind of a password manager, maybe an enterprise level tool for security, so you can kind of manage access for remote employees. Making sure you have your VPN access so you can access your tools from outside the office. Maybe even having some kind of like a team wiki for FAQs and tutorials. And finally, besides having the right tools, I think having the right equipment is really important when you're working remotely. This means having a proper desk, a comfortable chair, a headset, dual monitors, a fast internet connection, everything you need to set up your home office or your remote office, right? so that you're productive. Quick screenshot from a video conferencing tool called Appear.in that I like to use. I personally like it better than Google Hangouts because it's faster. I think it's HTML5 and it doesn't require someone to have a Google account. This is a quick screenshot of my team using this, and this is the home slice tool that I was talking about. It's a really great way to you put in your locations, and it's a great way to find the time difference. It does the math for you, so you can quickly show what's the best ideal time to find to have a meeting across various different time zones. So when I was managing my team in India, like I said, they were 13.5 hours ahead of California. So I using a system like this really helps kind of establish, okay, it's 7 o'clock my time. That means it's 8:30 over there in India. And it was really helpful to make sure that you're respectful of people's off hours, right? Not everyone's in the same time zone as you are. So I think it's really important that you use tools like these to help with that process. So if you take away anything from today's talk, here are the 6 things I want you to know. Okay, you got to be proactive, right? Master the technique of managing up, right? Keep stakeholders, especially your direct manager, in the loop as much as possible, right? Let them know what you're working on a whether it's a particular assignment. Just make sure that you're giving them updates without them asking for it, right? Be proactive. You must keep them in the loop. Over communicate if you have to. I think it's better than not, or I think it's better than not mentioning something at all, right? So over communicate if you have to. Be prepared. When going into meetings, make sure you have read the necessary documentation. You come up with questions and examples, right? I think it's important to participate. Yes, you're remote, but your input is still valuable, right? Make sure your documentation and your wireframes are as complete as possible when presenting it, right? You don't want to look bad when you're presenting in front of stakeholders. Be professional. Yes, you're working remotely, but it doesn't mean that you can slack off, right? You need to deliver results. And oftentimes you're doing so with little supervision, right? So make sure you're actually working when you say you are. If you're working from home, don't do things like watch Netflix or do laundry in the middle of the day, right? I mean, this goes without saying, but just because you're not in the office, like, don't get drunk, right? I mean, be professional. Be consistent. Have a daily routine. Get out of bed as if you were going into your main office. Make sure you're on time. Do the little things that really put you in that professional mindset, right? I think it's really important to know that, and just make sure you're on time, like I said, and then finally be available, right? So I think this is one of the most important tips that I can give you, and one of the most important factors in the success of any product manager that's working remotely is going to be your availability and your flexibility, right? So no one should really be able to tell that you're not physically in the office, right? And as a product manager, you're the focal point of communication for a lot of different teams, and you're the main go-to person for a lot of different projects, right? So make sure you keep a regular schedule so people know not only what hours you're working, but how to get a hold of you, right? If you're stepping out, make sure you're clearly communicating that, or whether it's an away message or whatnot, and make sure you tell them when you're going to come back, right? So you just make sure to be available, and then finally, setting boundaries. Okay, so studies show that people who work remotely typically work more hours, right? It's very easy to lose track of time and get caught up with work, right? Especially if no one's around. You're likely always going to be connected, right? So you're going to have the temptation to quickly respond to an email after hours, right? Don't. Set clear boundaries. You need to maintain a work-life balance. It's okay to respond to emails if you're working on a certain project for a short period of time, but really just make sure you have off hours and stick to those. I've heard so many stories about people burning out when working remotely simply because they're working 10, 12-hour days. Make sure you're taking breaks. Just sitting in front of a computer, you can only do that for such a long time, right? So just remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So set some clear boundaries. Yeah, thank you so much. This is it for my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at RishiKMBA. And thank you so much for your time. Here are some sources that I used for my presentation. So if you want to check them out.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, Rishi. Senior Product Manager at TEN, the Enthusiast Network, for today's discussion on working remotely. And as always, that presentation you saw and all that other information you saw there will be posted to our SlideShare channel for your later viewing pleasure. And also a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us today, and the product mentor. And also, if you're interested in being a product mentor like today's speaker, Rishi, to product people of all sorts all around the world, please sign up. We're looking for more mentors, and you sign up at theproductmentor.com, and you say you'd like to be a mentor. Session 5 starts on May 1st, and we're looking for more mentors. Also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all that said, I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.